I waited almost a year and a half for this opportunity to talk. I just like to thank Hunters College, April Gorky, Mian Barkan, and Akio Furukawa for making this all possible and sharing my story about my experience in American concentration camp, tacit deportation to Hiroshima, Japan, spending time in Hiroshima, and back to the United States, living in South Central Los Angeles. And during my time, there was Vietnam War going on, and there was a draft, how I volunteered, and I'll talk about why I volunteered to fight for this country. And ultimately, I like to talk about how I was able to realize my American dream. This will be the topic. And also at the end, I would like to introduce my wife, who had nursed and supported me during my hard times as I came back from Vietnam, 1971, with PTSD and also exposed Agent Orange. And I gave her such a hard time, but next year we'll be celebrating our 50th year. I don't know how we did it, but you'll be able to meet her a little bit later on. And also, you're probably wondering why I have an American flag behind me, why I'm wearing a uniform. And I will tell you about this at the end of my story. Now, I like to kind of start with my story, how my father came to this country from Hiroshima, Japan. You see the boat, he came here in 1921. This was right after Spanish flu pandemic. Ours lasted, with the vaccine coming up, about a year. The Spanish flu pandemic lasted 3 years. He was 13 years old when he came to Florence, Sacramento. I didn't know, but in 1920s, Japanese and Caucasians, they had a segregated school. In Florence, he went to segregated school. He finished 8th grade education. But during that time, right after Spanish flu, they had a recession in America. So his family could not keep him. So he became a migrant farmer. He picked strawberries at age 14, but he had street smarts, and he was able to realize American dream, even though he only had 8th grade education. I just see Oka Produce. This is a wholesale business. This happened in 1938. He was 32 years old. And he always remembered how America gave him a chance. So even though we're deported back to Japan, he always wanted to come back. We couldn't come back, but I'll talk about it later, how we came back. But he always wanted us to come back and us to realize our American dream. And we were able to do that. Now, when the war started, President Roosevelt passed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. This imprisoned, excuse me, 120 Japanese, American, and Japanese nationals in West Coast. This said Japanese American were a threat to the West Coast, so they had to be locked up. In 1978, a lady named Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga was able to find a document that showed that Japanese American were not threat to West Coast at all. And even though this happened, it took 75 years for the American Supreme Court to rule this Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. And this was just blatant racial discrimination. And I like to read a letter, apology letter by President Clinton. It was signed in 1988, Civil Liberties Act of 1988, signed by Reagan. However, it took 5 years to come to me because together with this letter, they gave us $20,000 monetary award. Unfortunately, over half, and most people were not able to witness this event. $20,000. Let me just read this letter, and it tells you what happened to us. Over 50 years ago, the United States government unjustly in turn evacuated or relocated you and many other Japanese Americans. Today, on behalf of your fellow Americans, I offer sincere apology to you for the actions that unfairly denied Japanese Americans and their families fundamental liberties during the World War II. In passing the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, we acknowledge the wrongs of the past and offer redress to those who endure such grave injustice. In retrospect, we understand that the nation's actions were rooted deeply in racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and lack of political leadership. We must learn from the past and dedicate ourselves as a nation to renewing the spirit of equality and the love of freedom. Together, we can guarantee future with liberty and justice for all. You and your family have my best wishes for the future. The thing I regret most about this apology letter is the fact that over 50% of internees were not able to receive this letter and this letter of apology, even though at this time, Supreme Court had not ruled Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. Now, our family, at the time they were living in East LA, and my father was able to realize his American dream, even though he only had 8th grade education. Our family was living well, had a car, had a nice rental apartment, and he lost everything, including his business. Not only that, he lost his dignity and hope for the future. And this, I have to remind you, happened in this American soil, and this could happen again, as when President Trump took over, happened to Muslim Americans. We must safeguard our civil liberties and Constitution. It is our job to say, but it is a great country, and there's an opportunity for everybody to realize their dream. Now, I'm gonna talk about myself now. I was born in Turtle Lake. This was called Turtle Lake Segregation Camp, not internment camp, because we were deemed most dangerous. Why deemed most dangerous? Because in 1943, US government passed a loyalty question, specifically 27 and 28. Very unfair question. One was, would you willfully volunteer in armed forces to defend our country? My father had lost everything. He had 4 kids in the camp. Of course, he would say no. And question 28 was, would you disavow Emperor of Japan? Well, at that time, our grandparents, both my father, they had lived in Hiroshima, Japan. And if this if they would have disavowed Emperor of Japan, they would not be able to go back to Japan. They answered no. 10% of Japanese Americans answered no, no. The other 90% did not. And actually, this loyalty question has divided the Japanese community within the internment camp. And this was done by the US government. Now, I was born in Turtle Lake. You could see my picture. I was smiling. Probably I didn't know I was locked up in the barbed wire fence here. And the other picture, they probably took this before we're deported back to Hiroshima, Japan. I must have been close to a year and a half. Now, there were pictures of Santa Anita racetrack. First 6 months, they were in the Santa Anita racetrack because they were building 10 internment camp in the remote areas of the United States where the camps were very inconspicuous. And so that was the first camp they went to. And my sister would say during the summertime, they were there from spring through fall. And summertime, the stench in the stable was unbearable. But that's how they live in Santa Anita. But the first camp they went to was called Lower in Arkansas. So they went all the way from Los Angeles, California, all the way to Lower Arkansas in a train. They had the shades down. When they were leaving Los Angeles, they had to put the shades down so that nobody would see us were being sent to this imprisonment. And third and the final camp was Turtle Lake. April, you could probably show 3 different camps where, yeah, that was the lower. And final one is Turtle Lake. This was just before we were released to go back to Japan. And what happened was a tacit deportation. People who went back to Japan lost their citizenship, like my mother, who could not come back. And I'll talk about a loophole, how we came back one by one from 1952 to 1956. But anyway, right after we were released, not too many people went back. In fact, the people in Turtle Lake camp were supposed to go back to camp because they were very dismayed with the treatment received. In fact, our sisters were studying Japanese language, Japanese culture, so they could go back to Japan because they didn't want to live in a place where they had the racial discrimination, put you in prison for nothing. But anyway, this is the military ship that carried about 500 troops during the World War II and Korean War. But anyway, that's the the boat we took back to Yokosuka. From Portland, Oregon, went to Yokosuka. And then what I heard from my sister was that from Yokosuka to Yokohama, they were bused. And the charter train was waiting for them. At that time, because of it was a steam train, now they have a bullet train that was 3-4 times the speed. It took about 10 hours. And one of my sisters, Margie, she was telling me one day that even though this was chartered, the train was chartered, since the World War II ended, all these soldiers from Japan coming back from the Pacific packed into the train. So she could not go to the toilet. So what my father did is that when the train stopped, opened the window, and she must have been really light, even though she was light. She was really tiny. But she had to urinate on my father carrying her. So it was a chaos at that time because war just ended. They were coming back. So that's how we came back to Hiroshima. And when we went back to Hiroshima, Japan, as you know, Hiroshima was flattened. And if you notice the map, my mother's side actually was very close to the epicenter of the bomb. I was about a mile away from there. But fortunately, there was a Manhichi, which protected them from the blast. So they were okay. But us, well, we lived further up north, and we lived in Nishihara, which is about 7 miles away. If you go to the next picture, is the house that we lived in Japan. It looks nice right now, but when the atomic bomb hit Hiroshima, the roof was all taken off, just like the tornado hit it. So even though they're like 7 miles away, they had a damage to the house. This is where I lived from 1946 to 1956. One of the first things I noticed and really haunt me to this day is that when we visited my mother's house, our grandparents, and my uncle used to take me to a river for swimming. And I noticed a burn, a scar mark on his back, and his arm, and his face. And I would dare not ask him a question. I must have been about 4 or 5. I wouldn't dare ask him a question about the burn because he would never talk about atomic bombing, especially me coming back from America. Another thing I noticed is that he could not get a girlfriend to marry him. In those days, they had arranged marriages. And anybody who was exposed to atomic bomb, they had a hard time getting partners in fear that maybe the child they bear, you don't know what would happen to them. So they had a hard time. Even the beautiful girls were rejected by arranged marriages because they were exposed to atomic bomb. For this reason, when I came back to the United States, not right away, but most recently, like 1987, I started Hiroshima Kai of New York to gather to join for social reasons. But from 1994 to now, we commemorate these hibakusha, the victim of atomic bomb, on August 5th, which is August 6th in Japan. And we take pictures by television to show hibakusha and their loved ones. The people in America care. We like peace too, you know. And we used to have a silent march. It's in my garage, but I have pictures of 30 victims of atomic bombing. And each year we go to a different church and we have, commemoration, reading the Declaration of Hiroshima. In fact, one of the person who used to send me all this declaration might be watching this program today. But we do that because I have experienced this in Japan. But there are more funny stories that I would like to kind of go to the next page, April. On the extreme left, you see me, must be about 4 or 5, and you can see the short screen in the back because I was so young that I used to tear those papers out, but that was me there. In late 1940s, I remember we get care packages from my aunt in New York, who worked in Harlem in the laundry business. And she wasn't doing that well, but she used to send us care packages with chocolate, such as Milky Way, Juicy Fruit Gum, marshmallows, and for parents, a coffee, maybe old secondhand sweaters and overcoats, stuff like that. And whenever we get this big package, we ran to get to the package so we could get our goodies. But I was so small, my sisters are a lot bigger than I was, so they would end up with all the goodies. But one thing I found that's still remaining in the bag was this cloth with the beautiful marbles, real colorful marbles. In those days, my neighborhood kids would not play with me. The fact that they used to call me America Gaidi, a returning from America, us somebody foreigner, somebody different, and they would not play with us. So, but when I got this marble, I knew that they'll play with me because they were playing with the dirty, beat up marbles, and usually the winner takes all the marbles home. But anyway, when I got the marbles, sure enough, I had an opportunity to play with them for that particular day. And I would last maybe 15, 20 minutes of beautiful marbles. I mean, because I didn't know how to play marbles, they would take that away from me. As you know, the winner, the expertise with expert players take all the marbles home. And I would remember taking this empty cloth back home, and my mother would say, "What happened, Takeshi? What happened to the marbles?" I would smirk. But, you know, I was happy that I had made friends, that I was able to play with them. Yeah, I will talk about my Furumoto realty later on when I was able to realize our dream, but I must have been a salesman starting from that time. And if you see the extreme right, you could see that overcoat there. That was sent by my aunt. And sometimes we used to get hand-down. Sometimes even I used to get hand-down sweaters from my sisters. But, you know, those days we didn't have clothes. So anything that kept you warm, it didn't matter. So I used to wear them anyway. But the thing I remember the most was one day, my mother would call me and say, "Takeshi, come on." Well, she got a cowboy outfit, including the boots, cowboy hat, holster, pistol. And she would put this on. Of course, I would right away go show this to my neighborhood kids, and I become envy of the block for the day. And I was very happy. And I thought I had this cowboy outfit. I thought that was mine. 3 days later, I promised one of the kids, "I'll show you that outfit again." And I asked my mother, where's my cowboy outfit? And my mother said, "I can't find it." What happened? I later found out that she had taken that cowboy outfit to black market in Hiroshima City in exchange for bread and rice. And she used to take coffee, maybe condensed milk, or she would take the secondhand coat or sweater, so she could bring back rice and bread. But I didn't know that until later, but it must have been really devastating for her. But those are the days that I remember about Japan. And if you go to the next page, that was last year that I was in Japan. That was my 5th grade class. I was to the extreme left on the bottom wearing a hat. First 2 years, I had a hard time making friends. But if you know how to peddle marbles, I guess you could do almost anything. And I was able to be voted the class president for my 4th, 5th, 6th grade. About 5 years ago, President Obama came to Hiroshima to pay respect. My wife and I said, "Well, we must see this." So we went back to see. That was a great event. At the same time, I wanted to go back to my alma mater. At that time was about 60 years later. and I was able to talk about war and peace. At that time, fifth and sixth graders were taking Heiwa Gakushu, which means peace class. Uh, and, uh, and I was able to talk about war, about what happened to Japanese Americans because of the war, and what happened to Hiroshima because of the war. They want peace, and my experiences in Vietnam. And this particular event hit the mass media, and one of my classmates discovered me. And 2 years ago, we had a reunion after 63 years. My teacher, real tall teacher there, and he was at my train, my last day my in Hiroshima. We had a we had reunion. 10 students showed up, and most of the kids were actually a victim of atomic bomb, but some had died, but some they couldn't locate, but I was able to meet them. So it was a good experience that I was able to have. There are some good memories that I had. Now, my father always wanted to come back to America because he himself, even though with 8th grade education, he was able to dream the American dream. In Japan, right after the war, we had a hard time having my 4 older sisters, big family. It wasn't easy. So we found out that when my sister Mary turned 21, she was able to recall parents back to United States. So from 1952 to 1956, it took us 4 years to reunite, but we were able to come back to America. First, my sister Mary came when she was 19, worked a couple of years. Second, my second sister Lillian came and worked. And third, finally, in 1954, my father came. And following year, my other sister, Margie, came 55. And ultimately, myself, my other sister, my mother, came back to America. But it was one of my happiest days of my life, getting reunited together. But these are the hardships that had the executive order 9066 had created. But for us, we have to survive, but we went through whatever it was in our way. The class that I went, next page, April, you could see my classmate. Yeah, that's, I was, you could see me second row on the right. I thought America was like students who have blonde hair, blue eyes. To my surprise, I went to the class and most of the kids were Black and Hispanics. And those days, this was in 1950s, Japanese American were still into the undesirable areas. Of course, you know, when you're a kid, you make friends with anybody. I got along, I made friends. But the same thing that what I had experienced happened to me in Vietnam when I went there the first day in my advisory team, 43, in Duc Quay, Hang Nghia province near Cambodia. You know, things like this just keeps on happening in this country. We have to kind of safeguard and really protect our civil liberties and our constitution. But anyway, this was my class. The day I really dreaded the most in those days was that Pearl Harbor Day, December 8th. And my good friends, I mean, I met friends right away, and they said, hey, Jap, you know, and I don't know what the hell Jap was. I was just learning the language. And I later found out what it means, but, you know, even my best friend called me Jap. And to this day, I shudder whenever Pearl Harbor Day comes, because it always reminds you, you know, this happened. And well, again, mass media, people at the top, they have to do something about this. If you go to the next page, In 1959, my aunt, who used to send us these care packages, started a Japanese restaurant, one of the first one in 1959. I think Saito was first, this was second, right near Columbia University. So our family went to help from May to August. This was the time when, during the summertime, I'm in a Boy Scout, and that's how you see the picture here. And at that time, we lived on 94th Street. It wasn't a very good area either. I attended Joan of Arc Junior High School at that time. Those days, I was like gypsy from Japan, Gion Elementary School to Beaumont Avenue Elementary School and to Berger Junior High School in LA to Joan of Arc, and then coming back to Wilson to Audubon. But I don't know how I did it. I made friends pretty quickly, but that was part of my life. And if you go to the next page, us sibling, we try hard. I mean, well, like I mentioned, anything came my way. I mean, we try our best to overcome it. And I was able to graduate from UCLA. This was a last business class undergraduate, and became a Anderson School of Business, only graduate school, but this is the college I attended. My sister, Margie, she was a pharmacist, and she worked a couple of years so that we could buy a house in South Central LA. And then she went back to school to become a doctor. She was able to realize her dream. And my sister, Lillian, the second oldest sister, she was helping us with pay the debt when we came to America. So she didn't go back to school until she was 28. And she went to junior high school, junior college first. And then she became a high school teacher, math teacher at Gardena High School. In 1980s, she taught Japanese because the Japanese language became very popular. My other sister, Kay, she had studied to become a beautician. And she studied that in New York, and she became a beautician in LA. And my sister, Mary, who recalled everybody back to Japan, she got married after we came back. By 1974, when I opened Furumoto Realty, she came to help me open this up. But all of us were able to realize our American dream. This is what my father wanted it, and we were able to do it. And you go to the next page. This was time when the war was taking place, 1968, 69, 70. It was really heated up. And these were draft days. And I didn't want to become a private. I didn't want to take a second seat to nobody in this country. And I went to officer candidate school. This is a graduation picture of engineering OCS. My entire class, if you go to the next picture, our entire class graduated as intelligence because President Nixon came in, and they needed advisors, not foot soldiers. So our entire class became intelligent. So all of us went to Vietnamese language school and combat intelligence. And I could talk about Vietnam a little bit later, but this is the school I went. Again, you could see I was the only Asian American, and there's one Black, and there was one Filipino, mostly Caucasians, but good that I did, even though it was hard for us, but well, we became soldiers. But I'll talk about Vietnam a little bit later, but you could go to the next page, and you'll be able to meet my wife a little bit later on. And this is my romance in my lifetime. My salary increased from $200 to $600. Being an enlisted man, you only got about a couple $100. When you're officer, you got $600. This particular common gear was only $1,200. And of course, it's a Volkswagen engine. My wife used to call this Tinker Toy. And I said, well, this is like a Porsche. Well, of course, it goes up the hill. You have to race with the trucks. But anyway, this is when I used to date her. And I attended Vietnamese language school, Presidio Monterey. It was about 320 miles one way. And I used to go back, meet with her and date her. I put on a lot of mileage. That's when the romance started. But everything came to an end when I had to go to Vietnam. Go to the next page. I was stationed near Cambodian border. There's a river there, across the border, there's a hamlet. And then there was a buffer area. 2 miles away was Cambodian border. This is where President Nixon bombarded a place called Batu, stronghold of Viet Cong. That's when we got all the refugees and POWs coming to our area. And because I was dating my wife, and I hardly study, I was last in class. So when I was interrogating prisoners, they had a blank face on their face. They could not understand me. I mean, so they got me interpreter, but that was the typical outfit that I had. I had a 45 pistol, my sunglasses. That's Major Ebby. He was my boss. And the previous one was Major Cooper, black guy, but he got ambushed by Viet Cong during broad daylight, and he was sent back to Japan because he was doing it so bad. And so he came, and for a while, especially during May 1971, because Major Cooper got ambushed, got wounded, and actually was sent back. I was first in command at this post here. And I was District Intelligence Operation Coordinating Center. And also I wore another hat as an advisor. We're advisors to National Police. And we're involved with the Phoenix program, a counterinsurgency operation, together with the National Police Chief. And if you go to the next page, you could see the green Jeep. That's the National Police Jeep. This is the second Jeep I got. The first Jeep had a bullet all over the place because the deputy National Police got all shut up when we were exchanging intelligence at the Arvin. Arvin means that this was the Vietnamese troops, 25th Infantry Division. Our American Infantry Division was sent back. So they closed it. That was back in 1970. And those two ladies, you see, they called that a donut ladies. They never brought donuts, but they came to cheer us up, so they would spend maybe half day with us, cheering us up, and they used to go back. And the next picture you see is the time I was decorated Bronze Star. And we're at the sugar mill, it's called French Quarters there. And so usually when you station in Vietnam, you hooches out of sandbags, but we're lucky that we had a nice building there. That's where I was stationed. Oh, before I forget, 6 months after you go to Vietnam, you're entitled to R&R, rest and recreation. And I was able, my wife surprised me. She came to Japan in August of 1970 when they had Expo 1970, because her father actually grew up next village to mine. Hers was Higashihara and mine was Nishihara. This was first time in her life she went to Hiroshima, but I met her. It was really nice to see her. Only problem was, even after 6 months, there was a different person within me. When you're fighting your life every single day, you become very cold. You become a different person. I think she realized that I was a different person. But I like to share one funny story. When we were in Hiroshima, I was about 25 and she was about 22 years old. We're adults. Oh, this was in 1970, though. It's been a while, but uh, my grandmother, my mother's side, insisted that my wife and I have a chaperone because we wanted to go see the Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan by bullet train. She would not let us go. I mean, she was still the big boss. So my aunt came with us, and at that time, my aunt's only daughter just got married in Osaka, so we went to visit her. But on the way coming back, I mean, I had to go back to Zama camp in Tokyo and go back to Vietnam, and she had to come back to Hiroshima. So we're at the train station, and like all Americans do, we had farewell kiss, and I didn't know, but she had her eye bulged out and she screamed, and oh God, it was so embarrassing. But I could never forget that face of hers. But that happened to us when I was 25 and she was 22, and just went for overnight at Expo. But anyway, that happened. But our relationship began to wane at this time because of my PTSD was beginning to settle in. My Agent Orange, when you look at the picture of me with the Major Eddie and on the boat across the way, there was a buffer area, and that used to be a jungle. And they used the Agent Orange defoliant, and we would put a radar near the hamlets, and any movement that we have, we used to shoot artillery. And then whenever there was a movement, we used to go in for body count. And sometimes I would go there, and perhaps because of that, because of the defoliant, I was exposed to Agent Orange. And of course, you know, during this war, they used to have Agent Orange defoliants, also napalm. 3 months after I left Dukwei district in Trambang, which was part of the district of Hanya province, I don't know if you remember the picture of this young girl, maybe 4 or 5 year old, naked running because of napalm. There was a Time magazine, and that happened. And this happened fairly frequently in Vietnam. But anyway, somehow I came back in one piece. I had a PTSD, and Agent Orange, but I came back. But the PTSD, the number on me, our relationship with my wife started waning. When I came back, she was still in Hiroshima. She came back a couple of weeks later. And if you see the next picture of the family, this was the last picture of a Furumoto family, because I decided I wanted to get away from all the loved ones. I just did not want sympathy from anybody. And I was able to get a job in Mikasa in Secaucus, New Jersey. I drove cross country in a common Gia, and I left the house. Half of the adults here had passed away, including my parents, my oldest sister, and 2 of my brother-in-law. All my nephews and nieces are 50s and 60s, but it was a good thing that we took a picture. But that picture, even though I look fine over there, I was in the second row, 2 from the left, but the different body, I mean, different person was inside my body there. But anyway, I live by myself, and I didn't make any friends in New Jersey. But I really got lonely, and I started to call my wife because I remember the romance that we had. It took a while for her to convince her to marry me, but she did marry me in 1971. Almost married 72. Almost married 50 years, but I don't know how we did it. But But we really had a hard time. Number one, I wasn't myself. I need some punching bag. I didn't physically beat her up, but I need a punching bag, somebody to really uh, lean on. And I used to send her back to LA, this and that, but she came back. But somehow or other, we made it. And I got myself a job, real estate, and we opened the office in 1974 in June. And I didn't know it at that time. This was a gold mine. I started in a small office because we ran out of all the money. My saving in Vietnam was gone. My wedding money, it's all gone. My wife used to work part-time here and there, but that wasn't enough to really make a good living. We live in a pauper. That particular office was only $100 a month. It's a basement. It was, as you walk in, there was another real estate office, and then in back of the office, there was another office. That's why I used to rent. I used to be in the office for 3 years. But during that time, Japan had become a second economic power. And in the 1980s, they used to come to New York City to buy up Rockefeller Center buildings. Even myself at that time, our office was the top sales for Donald Trump. We sold most offices, most apartments near Central Park, 6th Avenue and Central Park South. And also we sold first building that Japanese bought was Sumitomo Fudosan, about 489 Fifth Avenue for $32 million. That particular commission was almost $1 million. And I really had to pinch myself. I said, am I dreaming? But being in the right place at the right time means everything in the business. You don't have to go to Harvard. You don't have to have money. Those things doesn't matter, but the timing is everything. And I was in the right place at the right time. But talking about Donald Trump, he hasn't changed, I don't think. Only time he really talked to me was 1993. All of a sudden, out of blue air, out of the air, empty air, he would call me. He said, "Tak, do you remember that guy you introduced me to? The guy who bought Pebble Beach? Well, let me check with my salesperson who attended to him." But anyway, I was able to get the phone number from him. And if you see the tax record of him, he was going bankrupt at the time. So that was the only time he had ever contacted me. And I used to sell a lot of his condominiums, but not once did he say thank you. But he has not changed a bit. But anyway, during those days in the 1980s and early 1990s, Japan was buying up United States, New York City, and these trophy buildings like Rockefeller Center. And there was a jealousy going on. And in those days, New York Times used to call me about the situation with the Japanese market. Did you sell any buildings? What's happening with the Rockefeller Center and this and that? And the Times reporter said, "Oh, by the way, were you ever bashed? There's a Japanese bashing going on." This was the early 1990s. Yes, I said, I was bashed. In fact, I was bashed last night. I was in a restaurant. We had a visitor. He was the president of Nissan Motors. He came to visit. He used to live in our block. And then together with him and two other neighbors, we were in the restaurant. There was an older couple who sat right next to us with a disdain look on their face. They were looking at us all night long. And we're speaking mostly English, sometime in Japanese. When we finished the meal and going outside, this couple were waiting for me, almost picked a fight on me. He says, "Your Japanese are buying up America." I said, "Hey, wait a minute. you know, I'm American. I even served in this country. Don't call me a Jap. And that's it. Well, you're a Jap. Jap is a Jap. You're no damn good. I mean, I had a fist in my face, but I couldn't do it because of my clients. But and this hit the news, hit the first page of New York Times, and Oprah Winfrey got the wind of this, and I was hustled to the Chicago for Oprah Winfrey show. The title was, let me see, I think I skipped a few things. Oh yeah, Oprah Winfrey show. There was a title letter. Said, "Thanks for being a guest at the Oprah Winfrey show, entitled "A Japanese American: The New Racism." And I was invited together with the first general, Japanese American general. His name was General Mukoyama, and also the president, national president of JAC, of Japanese American Citizens League. Three of us, and there was a one white supremacist, and we talked to each other. But I was afraid right after this, I'm going to have some kind of after results. But since he was a general and he was disabled, his eyes were shot, and he was wounded in action. And of course, I was a Vietnam veteran. So even though we had this show talking about the bashing, we did not face too much after consequences. I was very surprised. And the same thing is happening again. At that time was Japanese, but then the Chinese person was killed, was hit by the bat in Detroit. So something like this happened to one nationality, it affects other nationalities. Even during the World War II, when we were in prison for 4 years, it must have been horrible for Chinese or even the Koreans or Asians. I mean, a lot of people can't tell the difference. So we really have to go to the top to make sure we recognize something like this doesn't happen. And it should be a day like Paramatsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution to recognize something like this, so the racism in this country doesn't happen again. I don't want any other Americans, I'm not talking about Asians or Japanese or anybody, any other American to face the same experience that we had to endure. This was terrible. But anyway, that was my experience with the business. And next page, you see our son, Scotty. He came along eight years afterwards. Our relationship, we didn't know if we're going to get divorced, we're going to get separated. We didn't know. I mean, I couldn't help it. It was a different person in my body, and she really helped me, nursing me and supporting me. And without her, I might be in New York City being homeless. But I really thank her, And next year is 50 years. I don't know how in the world we did it. Next picture, the picture of my son Scotty going to Georgetown. And Georgetown at the time was $40,000 in 1998. It was $40,000 a year. And my $20,000 I received from the US government went one semester. When I was going to UCLA, that was a public institution, so I only pay $80 a semester. Of course, if you're out of state, you pay more. But so I graduated 4 years and less than $1,000. But the private universities are very, very expensive today. One of the awards I got was from a congressional, instead of New Jersey, had a special award ceremony. This was the first time any authority were able to recognize our services in the United States. I mean, when we came back, people used to spit at us. It was a war that it was unbearable. You never talk about it. You just stayed the cocoon. You never came out of it. But 10 years ago, April 2010, they were able to give us, they recognized us, and it felt really good. It's important for some authority to recognize somebody who's fighting for the country, I believe. Oh, by the way, I promised to tell you why I am wearing Vietnam fatigue tonight. Well, for me, whenever I talk about internment camp or the concentration camp, I always think about young men, Japanese American men, volunteer in service, even though his family was locked up in a camp. And they have become the most decorated unit in the entire history of the United States. In June 3rd, they're going to unveil a stamp about these go for broke Japanese American young soldiers who had spent their time, despite the fact they didn't do anything, just that they were Japanese, were put in a camp. They did, according to President Truman, he says these young soldiers not just fought the war, they had prejudice. Absolutely, they had to fight prejudice. And I'm so proud of them. And I know how war is. Anyway, I'd like to introduce my wife, Carolyn, who's gone through hell with me.
I'm gonna turn this off. Oh, hi.
Anyway, she's my boss. I don't know. I guess in your life, you have to be lucky with your family, with your wife, with your friends. And I've been lucky. Well, anyway, thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my story. It is like therapy for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for talking to us today. And a lot of people in the chat, I don't know if you have it up, but a lot of people are saying hello and thanking you so much for sharing your stories and for your service. Yeah, do you want to, shall we open the floor to get questions from students?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think dialogue is very important.
So if anybody has a question, please feel free to put it into the chat and I will read it for TAC to answer. We'll give people a moment to think about what they want to ask. So Jackie asks, at what point did you realize that you were born in an internment camp?
Well, I was in Japan and my sisters will always talk about camp. And I thought it was a camp that kids go have fun. But later on, and I asked you, what was the camp? But this was where Japanese were locked up. But I couldn't quite understand it. But little by little, I understood. When I was going to junior high school in Los Angeles, the history book had only one sentence in the World War II section of the history book. Japanese Americans were interned. That was it. And not too many people. And well, for me, it wasn't direct because I didn't see the camp. Only time I went to see my camp was 10 years ago. I went back to the program in Turtle Lake. And for the first time, I saw where I was born. And what struck me most at that time in this particular program was that we went to cemetery. There were about 10 small size cemeteries. There were babies that born, just like me, were born in the camp or didn't make it. So sad. I know my wife's grandfather died in a camp, but you know, a lot of things that happen. But again, back to your question, I realized little by little, as a child, even Hiroshima, as a child, you don't really have this impact in you. As you grow older and older, you hear about it, you study it, and so forth. You grow to do something about it. For example, I commemorate the victim, Hibakusha, victim of atomic bomb for the last 28 years, doing silent march, reading the peace declaration. You do this little by little as you understand it. And it's so important, people like us as a survivor or seeing the aftermath of atomic bombing to talk about it and make sure they know, they know about it. So it takes time, but that is a good question. I mean, right off the bat, it took me a while. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, so we have another question from Ling Hao asking, do you still visit Japan regularly? And when was the last time you went back?
Well, in 1983, I was the first American to open a brokerage firm in Akasaka, Japan. In those days, I used to visit maybe 4 or 5 times a year. The last time I went back, most recently was my reunion with my 4th, 5th graders in Japan. But I went to that and also before that, I went to President Obama's coming to Hiroshima to pay respect. I went for that. But also in 2003, I had opened office in Shanghai and an office in Seoul, Korea. So what I used to do is that I would go to Shanghai, maybe go to Korea, and then Japan at the time. But 1980s, I used to visit Japan a lot, but not recently. I have not.
So another question from Danielle. How did your perspective on America change after realizing that you and your family were put in internment camps? Are you still angry at America for what it has done?
Well, you know, I was lucky. Can you imagine? There's a lot of people went to mental hospital, and it's like my aunt who used to live with us here. She used to live in San Jose, and whenever we talk about camp, she would get all upset. I know I have 3 living sisters now. One passed away. One of my sister, Margie, she asked me to, well, why don't you go to pilgrimage to see, where you're born. So I did that. And at the time, I asked my sister, Lillian, who became a school teacher, Kay, who is a beautician, and they had no intention of going. So again, it's different. For me, I was just born there. I wasn't there during that time. But I'm finding out more and more now, as I found out more and more, I don't want next American to face something like this. I don't want that. It is a terrible experience because you divide the family, you lose the dignity, you lose hope. Can you imagine going into the camp with the family, not knowing, just like the Jewish, when they were sent to the gas chamber, they didn't know what's happening. You read something, you don't know what's going to happen to you next. So it is a terrible feeling. But that's also a very, very good question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your thoughtful answer. Brandon asks, how did you get the nickname Tack?
Well, my first name is Takeshi, and a lot of people used to call me Takashi, and some people used to call me Tacos, and I got fed up with it, so call myself Tack. In fact, in elementary school, you saw my classmates, and they were having a hard time saying Takeshi, so I call myself Paul. But somehow the name Paul didn't quite do it with me. So I after 4 or 5 months, I changed. I said I'm not Paul anymore. But anyway, the tack always stuck with me. It's always been tack. Easy, like tic tac and thumbtack. And anyway, that's my answer.
Yes, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? Oh, here we go. Dante asks, any fond memories of Japan in your childhood?
My fun memories. The care packages. Those are memories. I was so happy to get. Every time care packages come, I didn't go for the goodies like the chocolates and gum and stuff like that. I went for the marbles. But my fond memories is that these kids would take you in. I was in with it, So those are good memories. But those days, well, we're starving, so we had a hard time. Especially, I came in 1956, but still Japan was still not doing that well at that time. Not too many fun memories, no.
Ivan asks, on a lighter note, you seem to have talked about your cars. What was your favorite car?
Car?
Car,
Well,
yeah.
Car. Well, for me, I have no interest in really any cars. Common Gear, I bought it because it was only $1,200. And I used to brag to my wife, doesn't this look like Porsche? And every time we go up the hill, I was racing together with the trucks. And she used to make fun of me. But even to this day, I drive my car over 120, 150,000 miles. As long as it runs for me, it's fine. I like to own a Porsche one day maybe, but I really don't go for that. And that goes for my wife. She drives Honda, CRB, and she puts in over 100,000 miles. But really, as long as it runs, for us, really, it doesn't matter what kind of car it is.
Yes, thank you. Dante mentions he hopes you one day get the dream car of yours. I have a longer message and question from David. He thanks you for your moving story. And he says, I once wrote a research paper on Japanese internment camps, but your story really brings this to life. My great-grandparents, too, emigrated to the US in the 1920s. My grandfather grew up in upstate New York, speaking only German at a segregated school, and later fought in World War II, where his language skills helped save his life when he was wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. He never spoke of the war and also distanced himself from Germany. How important is maintaining your cultural identity to you as a Japanese American and a veteran?
Well, like I said, I look up to the Japanese American young soldiers who fought during the World War II, despite what happened to them. And I think it is very important that you serve the country. Like my father brought us back to America. At that time, I became American. And my father, of course, he answered no to going into service because we had kids and everybody. But these Japanese American young soldiers, they had no place to go, but they had to survive in this country. That's why they try so hard to become good soldiers. I think all of us, I mean, all of us should uh, uh, think about, defending our country. It is our country, and not just defending it, safeguard the Constitution, safeguard our civil liberties. We have to do all these things. But, in hindsight, I came back with PTSD. It was horrible experience fighting with my wife every day. And Agent Orange, I take about 10 different pills every morning. And I get tired, and when you look back, yes, you do get these things, but hey, you are protecting your country. You're defending your country. It is part of your obligation, just like a constitution. So for me, hey, I don't complain that I have fact that I have Agent Orange. And my wife, I mean, she used to complain, but she doesn't complain anymore. But PTSD must have really hurt her. But all these things happen. War's hell. I mean, you have to do something like peace movement. Hibakusha, Hiroshima victim, the atomic bomb. Even to this day, they go around the world on a peace boat and say, don't let same thing happen to what happened to us. I mean, really, the war creates so much ugliness. Not just the person who goes to war, person around you, like your wife, your loved ones, everybody suffers. And also in a pocket, I mean, it costs money for them to take care of me for Agent Orange. It costs money. I mean, war is nothing. It's, look at what happened in Japan, evaporated. You just can't get married because you have the nuclear stuff in you. So anyway, war is no good. That's why I feel very important, and I really feel honored to really commemorate Hibakusha August 5th here, because they try to propagate peace. And peace is the only way. Only when you go to war, face this death and life situation, you know what war is about. And when you come back, you know what war is about. So war is no good.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And telling us about all of your experiences. We are just about out of time. Do you have any final comments or messages? I mean, you've already left us with a lot of really important messages in your talk. Thank you. But is there anything you'd like to say to sort of wrap things up?
Well, this is your country. You have to really safeguard what Constitution is. I mean, Constitution really works, even though it took 75 years for Supreme Court to declare Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional, but they did. It works. But again, we have to be on top of it. So what I like to say is you got to be proactive, and you got to fight for your rights. Stand up what is right. That's a famous word of Fred Kuromatsu. Stand up for what is right. He fought it. He paid price for it, but he fought it. And his conviction was overturned.
Thank you so much for talking to us this evening. We have people in the chat, again, everyone thanking you for sharing your stories with us. Please, yes, happy 50th anniversary to you and your wife. Please enjoy it. And again, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you for letting me share my story. it is like therapy for me, and I really enjoy it. And people do have to understand it. They must know it. I'll continue to do this. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And good night, everybody.